IT risk management. And I'm very particular here. It's IT risk management. It's not cybersecurity risk management, and it's not business risk management. So here we focus on IT risk management. First of all, yes, IT risks are part of business risks, because at the end of the day, you cannot see it separate. Yes, you can always say that this is from a perspective of a CIO, because availability risk is there, for example. It's a typical IT risk because the system is not up and running and cannot be supported, but ultimately it's a business risk. You can decide how you want to do it. So, I mean, since it's a complex topic and it doesn't make sense to oversimplify it as well, because risk is something tricky. I mean, you have to know what is the consequences. So ideally how it's done is that the IT department does their own risk assessment and then hands it over in a condensed way to the business and say, look, this is what I'm looking at. And then business can draw conclusions and say, okay, so in this system, then we have an availability risk. That system, we have a confidentiality risk. So what is the financial impact of those? And then they know how to evaluate it and know how to put it into the entire risk landscape or the risk portfolio to do the whole exposure. But let's stick to IT risk management here. Follows the same normal risk management process, which is identify a risk. So that's usually the tricky part because they're not falling from the sky. You can use threat models to do that. You can use common risk catalog. You can start from your security policies and see the deviations to it and then outline risks based on that. Multiple ways to get to it. You will have a lot of overlap. That's not bad. I mean, don't get thrown off. Don't do too many workshops to figure out if you have overlaps. Rather, you raise one risk more and create a financial cushion for either mitigating that risk, which is the ideal case of risk management, or you build another financial cushion that you are able to handle the risk if it comes through. Nevertheless, you need to analyze it, of course, ideally not alone, but you can do it ideally within the IT department first, because you have to know what is the impact in terms of landscape, other systems affected, repercussions, recovery time, recovery efforts. And then don't underestimate this step, because usually people like to jump straight into the implementation part. No, but plan the mitigation. Again, there will be more risks that you can handle. And being a CISO, you have to accept also risks and you have to handle certain risks first. That's part of your business acumen that you have to apply. So therefore, plan the mitigation means so much as out of the analysis, which includes a bit of a prioritization, you should make a concrete plan. Because sometimes you figure out that the risk measure with the biggest impact is a bit disproportional to the effort that you have to put into it. So in the meantime, then working on that one that thinks you shave off 20% of your risk, with all the problems and impediments you will be facing to implement that fully to really recover from that risk threat, you may be better off doing incremental, smaller risk mitigations, which are easier to plan, easier to approve, easier to execute, and then you shave off maybe 25% in the same time. Or you even faster because you can do certain measures at the same time, so you will reach 20% faster. From your analysis initially, you will look at it and say, what, 10 measures with 5%? Oh my God, I have to do at least like 5 measures, but all these 5 maybe can run at the same time, whereas the other big one with 20% is a schedule for the next 1.5 years. And if something goes wrong, some person steps out and there's like project risks for it itself that it won't be executed accurately, that maybe defeats the whole purpose. So plan the mitigation, lay it out, see if you can run parallel, see what benefits each other. Maybe there's a common denominator that you can use to implement it. Implementation, no need to say much. It's a typical measure implementation. Track it, put a date, put a name on it. and make sure it's done right, that it's reviewed, and again, make your sanity check afterwards. And that's part of this review and tracking. This is not just looking at it and seeing how the risk value goes down and celebrating victory every month. This is more like going back and saying, was the measure efficient? And the measure is only efficient if you could reevaluate the risk with the new situation, with these measures being implemented already, and you can clearly state, yes, the risk went down. Yeah? You may be distracted because by the time you have implemented the first few measures, you may figure out that there's new risks coming up. So it's important to identify this risk separately and saying, well, while I was working on that one and reduced by 10%, there's another threat coming up and it increased the whole value by 50. You have to be very transparent to your management to describe that, because otherwise they say, what have you done? Nothing happened, 5% up. I don't see any action here. Yeah? So maybe you can use this formula here, which is the common one, which is risk is probability times impact. Impact is usually something like a damage value. It doesn't have to be always a value in dollars, but you can also have a certain degree of impact. Yeah, you can measure it in ratings or whatever percentage. And probability somehow, if you want to put it down to something more understandable, is vulnerability times threat. Well, it looks like a formula. It isn't, because what is a threat? What value that have a threat? I mean, you have to evaluate your threats, you have to evaluate your vulnerabilities, then you have to evaluate your impact, and you have suddenly a formula with 3 multiplicators, and each of them could ruin the whole value. So at the end of the day, don't get hung up too much with the values. Usually when you need to use dollars is to make a business case to convince the management to fix the risk in the first place, or put some money aside for the bad situation to happen. But focus on the measure implementation. And if you talk about efforts there and say, how much does it cost me to do this measure? Yeah, maybe start from that angle and say it will be a 3 months project with 5 guys on it, and we have to buy this tool and that license. So it cost me, I don't know, $150,000. Don't we think that the risk we're facing here is more than $150,000, especially when we don't really look at probability and say it's inevitable that this risk will come true, so the impact would be $1 million. We don't have to think that maybe it's just 10% of $1 million, because the probability is 10%. If the risk hits you, if it comes true, you have to pay the full amount. So therefore, that is probably, when you put it the other way around, say, what does it cost to close it? Is it worth it? Let's do it. Yeah. And again, security risks are business risks. So technically, there's no security risk. Everything is a business risk. And it depends on your risk appetite and the risk appetite of your management to decide how much money they want to spend to get rid of certain things. But they have to face it. Risks are always coming up because new threats develop, new vulnerabilities come up, and if you're going into new technology, either if you don't keep up with new technology, you're facing risk. If you're going too fast into new technology, you're facing additional risks. So you have to stay somewhere in a sweet spot. And recommendation here, opinion is, start with exploitable vulnerabilities and weaknesses, because that is something no one can deny. You can say there's a finding, we have to fix it. So it's not something you can make up. Focus on the business impact all the time and say, what happens if I don't do it? Especially for internet-facing applications, what's the impact? Because it's not if the risk will come, it's just when. And to stay afloat for that time is basically where your planning and your prioritization comes in, because you just have to make sure you're not hitting the wrong buttons in the wrong time, so that you're working on the one that has the highest probability, and that's what only the probability can be used for, to say this is I do first because it's just too risky. I think it's coming soon. And the other ones, you don't park them and put them away. You just plan them out and say, right after that, I don't rest. I go straight in it, and I will have to fix this other things as well. So the plan must be always existing. You can deviate, you can reprioritize, you can come up with an alternative plan, reevaluate the risk. Again, don't forget it, that it's required to actually design something for the long term, and that will help you.